Okay, so what I would like you to think now is that you're going home from work and on the way, you come across a scene like this. And of course, this truck can attract your attention because it's white against a very dark background. But I'm also sure that your attention will be mostly driven by and attracted by these two guys in the middle. And the interesting thing is that you don't just see two people there, you also start feeling what is going on. So you can anticipate how much pain the upside down guy will be in once he touches the floor. And especially if he touches on the shoulder, on the head, you can really almost feel it in your body. And then based on this feeling, you can also start getting scared and maybe decide to run away. Or on the other hand, because you see how much in pain this person could be, you decide to stop and go and help. So what I'm interested in, and also all my lab and my collaborators, is trying to understand how the brain makes us to have these enriched, what they like to call these enriched perceptions, where we don't just see what's going on, but we start already having bodily reactions to what's going on around us. And so what are the brain mechanisms that allow us to perceive what goes on in other people? And here I also want to show a little bit how we approach this problem. So we initially, we did very simple experiments in which we asked people to come in the lab, and we normally work with Fmri, which is a method to image brain activity while participants perform a particular task. So I can see which area of the brain becomes active when you indeed are doing something that I ask you to do. And in this case, I was asking participants to perform actions. So like scooping a bit of soup from a bowl or drinking a glass of wine. And then in this way, if I image your brain activity while you do these actions, I can, and this is what you see here in red, for instance, is that these areas become active when you perform these actions. And now I can show you videos of someone else performing a similar action. And again, I can image your brain when you observe these videos. And what we observe here in blue are the areas that become activated when you see somebody else performing an action. And the interesting thing is that when I look at the overlap between these red blobs and the blue blobs over here, you can see that observing someone else performing an action basically falls exactly within the areas that were active when you were performing an action. So basically, it suggests that you use your own, the region that make you perform an action or to make you act in order to also understand and perceive what the other person is doing. And in a similar fashion, if now I touch your legs, for instance, so you don't need to do anything when you're in the scanner, you just need to be there, and I'm going to caress, and you see how science can be high-tech sometimes, just a hand with a glove. But then I can image, again, the areas of the brain that become active when you are touched on your body. And in the same way, I can show you videos of somebody else being touched. And let's see here. And I can image the brain areas that become active when you see somebody else being touched. And as you see, again, the blue and the red overlap quite nicely. So again, we came to the idea that, okay, also when I observe somebody being touched, what I do is basically I activate regions that normally make me feeling that I'm touched. So again, I use my own body and the regions that make me feel in order to perceive what goes on in the others. And what about emotions? Because of course, in the example I showed you, there was everything. There were actions, there were sensations, there were emotions. So here I asked participants in this case to wear an anesthesia mask, and we were puffing bad odorants in the anesthesia mask. So we could identify the brain regions that become active when I feel disgusted, for instance. And this is the anterior insula for no. And show you activated by somebody if I slap you on the hand, I will get the same regions also activated. And if I show you somebody else in pain, we have a nice overlap as we've seen before. And this time we also, in the case of pain, we also have an additional region that shows this overlap. So basically, after years of this kind of research, we concluded that every time that we see something happening to other individuals, we have a brain, activation of regions that are normally involved in us being in a similar situation. This is what we would call, we create a vicarious state in our brain. And it can, of course, encompass emotion regions that make us act and sense. And all these regions together, they contribute to give us a perception of what goes on. And we know that they contribute to the perception because we can use techniques that basically can perturb the activity in these regions while you're perceiving, while you're watching something. And these techniques can be something like what we call TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation. So we basically deliver the magnetic field on the top of the region that you want to perturb the activity of. And this magnetic field will influence the electrical activity of the neurons below. And and this means that the activity of that region will be momentarily and reversibly disrupted. So if a region contributes to, for instance, making you perceive something, if I now perturb that region when you're perceiving something, then your perception will be disturbed. So, and in another way to also investigate how important is the activity of a region in perception is also to work with patients that, for instance, tumor, or they have a dysfunctional region, and then you see whether these patients perceive, for instance, the emotions as much as control do. But when we are in pain ourselves, the reasons why we are in pain, for instance, is because the pain can motivate us, or will for sure motivate us, not to do the same action again and to avoid pain next time. So it serves to learn and to avoid the pain in the future. So we were wondering now, if I activate, for instance, the pain regions, so the regions that feel pain in myself when I see somebody else in pain, would then this serve as a motivator to actually go and help the other person? Like feeling pain myself is a motivator for me to get rid of, or not to act like this anymore. And to address the way we often address lab kind of setting, of course, it's never like real life, but we try to get as close as possible, is that, for instance, this time we ask people to come in, and they come in couple, and one is actually a confederate and one is our real participant. And the real participants will see the confederate getting pain, either as more shock on the hand, or in this case, we use, just old-fashioned belt. We slap the person on the hand. And now the participants, we play a bit of a trick, and we say, okay, now I can give you €6. You can keep these €6, or you can decide to give up some of this money in order to reduce the intensity of the next slap of the confederate, okay? So if you don't perceive pain in the first video, we're gonna present you again, or we're gonna hit the confederate with the exact same strength. On the other hand, if you say, oh, there was quite some pain, I'm gonna give up some of the money you gave me, then the next slap will be much milder, in proportionate to the amount of money that you donated. And as expected, we do find a very nice correlation between how much money the participant is willing to give up, and of course the intensity, or how strong we slap the hand of the confederate. And now we can image the brain and see which areas is activated when you see the hand being slapped, for instance, and we expect the same regions that are also activated when we feel in pain. And then I can use TMS, like the technique I explained you before, in order to see whether that particular circuit is necessary for me to decide to help somebody or not. So if we now go and perturb the activity of the areas we know is activated by the video, while you do the task, what we observed is that the nice correlation I showed you before here becomes much flatter, suggesting that I start basically donating money or giving up money a bit more randomly than I did before. So whenever I play, I perturb the activity of the somatosensory, for instance, that we know is part of that becomes active when you see the hand, we see that you start donating a bit more randomly. And then we of course, we wonder whether the stimulation was impairing my decision directly, or whether, considering that I showed you before that these regions is also involved in the way I perceive the other, whether I'm just perturbing basically the perception component, and as a consequence, my decision will be random because I don't perceive so well. So we modify the task, and what we now ask you is to tell us how much in pain the other person is when you see the movie. And when we do that while stimulating, as we did before, we see that the nice correlation between the intensity that the participant rate the pain to be and the actual pain that it was shown, again becomes, that changes after the perturbation. And in this case, because we changed the protocol, so instead of inhibiting the areas, we actually excite the area, we see that improves. But the most important aspect is that it suggests that the regions that are part of the circuits here, in particular, the one that we stimulated, was involved in the perception of the pain. And if I play around and now I shake, what's going on in this region, my perception will become not very good. And that's also why I will start, donating a bit more randomly. So I'm not influencing directly the regions that take probably the decision to help. And this is important because there is a bit of a tension between what people call the theory of mind circuits, where at one point people believe that we would understand what goes on in the other mainly by reasoning about others. But here, what over the years, what we observed is that there are several circuits in the brain that help us to understand what goes on in the others. Some are more cognitive and some are more embodied. And what we have shown you until now is more the embodied system. So the fact that, as I showed you before, we use our own self to understand the others. And this is quite fast, it's quite spontaneous. And then, of course, we can still reason about the others. So if something goes wrong, we use both circuits to probably take the decision. But the embodied circuits does not seem to act directly into the more cognitive processes like decision. It just indirectly informs the decision system. So why is it important to move and take a look at the animal world as well after all this research in humans? Well, the thing is that I've been telling you that we have this overlap between self and others. So the areas, activated in our own experience become active when we see the others. But at the end, when I speak of area and region, I'm speaking and I'm looking into thousands of neurons. So it could very well be that within these regions, we have some neurons that respond to myself and some neurons that respond to what happens to the others without any overlap. So all I've been telling you so far, it loses meaning because now there is no overlap. So it's not true anymore that I'm using my own experience to interpret the other. But it could also very well be that there are some neurons for which the response is common. So they really respond both to me and the other, and then some that only to me and some only to others. And these cannot be easily addressed in humans. I mean, there are some cases in which we can access patients that suffer of epilepsy, so we can directly record from certain regions of the brain. But the animal models offer, of course, much more flexibility. But in order to go animal, we need to really have a model that works, because otherwise it's not justified to go and use animal for that. And so we do know that the regions that are involved, that play a role in perceiving others in rodents are similar to those found in humans. And the next question is, can rodents perceive the emotional state of others? Lynn, can I ask you how much time I left?
None at all. I was just going to tell you that the 15 minutes are over. So if you could bring it to an end, would be great.
Okay. Do I have 1 minute or not at all?
Let's make it a very short minute.
Okay. Well, I will just tell you that indeed the rodents can perceive the emotions of others. So if they see an animal in distress, they will show that they are in distress themselves. And indeed, they also, we were able to record neurons within the rodent models, and we do find neurons that overlap, and that they basically respond both to the self pain and to the other pain. And then I will conclude. And I would like to indeed to summarize, simply saying that this vicarious state that we create seems to help us perceive the actions of others, and they also help us in informing the decision to operate in the environment. And then again, I have my last slide, where I would like also to thank all the people that contributed to this huge amount of work. And sorry for taking a bit longer.
No worries. Thank you very much for this fascinating talk. So I see a question by Anna.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, that was brilliant. Fantastic talk. But the first thing that comes to mind is clearly what's the sort of variability in these responses, and is it being modulated by personality types? Clearly, some people are more prone to helping others and others are not. And of course, that leads on to the question about pathology in terms of what kind of disorders can this lead to? They're less empathetic. We do know that it's a whole spectrum. Do you study that at all, or and how do you measure all of these? Clearly, your results were brilliant, but what's the sort of various?
No, it's a very good question, and I think if I had the viewers the talk a bit more yesterday, I would have had the time to show you the slides. But yes, there is variability. And so most of us, they do have this overlap. So it's quite present. I mean, it's everyone has it basically, but the amount to which we recruit the system varies a lot. Indeed, and also there are a lot of variables that modulate how much the system is involved, and it could be it's very situational. And it's also, if you're responsible of causing the pain of others, you're going to activate and recruit the system more. Or if you are, if you're looking at the at somebody that is in pain, but that before was unfair to you, then actually you reduce how much you feel empathy towards that person. Or you can even actively modulate up and down how much you're involved, and you recruit this system. So if I asked you, okay, now please look at this video or at this person, trying to understand how this person feels, then you would increase the activity. And if I tell you, oh, now you're a doctor, you need to really analyze the situation, then you would recruit this system less, which makes sense in terms of, adaptability in the environment. And then if we also looked in terms of population of interest, we mainly focus on psychopathy, because we really think that, that's a pathology for which this system could be impaired, because it has been observed many times that they are really good at detaching themselves to others. And indeed, this system is not so spontaneously activated by them. But the interesting results that we observed is that if we ask them to empathize, to really put themselves in the shoes of others, then their activity normalizes. So probably, yeah.
That's
so
very good.
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's good and not good, in the sense that then you wonder, okay, what's going on? So if they're really capable of regulating even more strongly than you would normally do, right, to up and down regulating, then the motivation starts to play a big role. And how do you,
how do you address the problem? Yes, that starts to get a bit more trickier.
Exactly. So yeah, but and it's interesting because the animals show the same variability and the same cost benefits kind of function. So that would also open a lot of new avenues to understand really what goes on.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Great. Well, thanks for that. That was really interesting talk.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions from the audience? I do have a quick one. I'm trying to wrap my head around what exactly you mean by this difference between embodied and cognitive. Is this like about the timescales at which these processes happen, or is it really about different parts of the brain that they happen? Because in the end, everything is somehow embodied, right? I mean, everything is in the brain.
Exactly. It's a long discussion that we could speak for hours about it. No, I agree. And yes, there are different parts of the brain that seems to be activated when you reason about something. So if you actively and consciously, you know, say, okay, let me think what Lynn is feeling right now, you know, and I start reasoning, then it recruits different regions than simply when I see you, that something happens to you. And these two circuits interact very much. But because people studied them for many years in a bit of a separate context and experimental design, then it started to be a bit of a dichotomy, which is not what's going on, basically, because all these depending on the situations you're in, whether it's really a situation where you're just, you know, walking in the wood and suddenly, you know, everything is silent, you know, the first reaction is really fear and embodied. You don't even wonder so much what's going on, but immediately after, and that's maybe indeed you're right, there could also be a bit of a temporal let's say delay or function there, that difference between the two, because one is a bit more spontaneous, automatic, so you would guess it's also a bit faster. But everything happens, you know, I mean, the neuronal response can happen between 50 to 100 milliseconds. So and of course, if you, when you start going from visual further away, then you sum up the time, then it takes long.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Fascinating.